Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. Leaves are starting to turn. Boy, the next few weeks are going to be beautiful with all the autumn colors. And in these mountains, the mountains look like just a wall of color, like a painter's palette or something. Mount Vishnu is that direction in the south. I'm facing east. And Mount Vishnu is a little higher than here. And so you can see it's already starting to turn. That's one neat thing about these mountains is that you have autumn comes in phases, because you have autumn in the high mountains and then in the valley it comes later. Okay, so today I'm reading the title and the comments, the what do they call it, like the little blurb we do about it. And quite a title. Ancient Secret Revealed. How to Attain Immortality. Maybe before we get started with that, there was just an eclipse yesterday. I imagine most of you know that it's better to stay inside and, close the shades. Don't even look at the eclipse or don't let the light shine in too much, that sort of a thing. And that was Eastern time. That was from 11:30 to 3. What did you do, Scotty? What time was it there? Oh, well, Scotty, we're losing you.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah. It was like 8:30 until like about 11 or so.
Yeah, so that's not bad.
Yeah, so we hung out inside.
Yeah, good. That's good. Yeah. There are a lot of principles like that if you don't have a lot of experience with Vedic knowledge or something, it can just seem like, that's just hocus pocus. But the more you study the structure of the Veda and Vedic knowledge, and the more depth you see in it, the more you start to realize that it's real. And so then some things that maybe you can't even relate to right off the bat, it's not faith, it's just an understanding of the depth and breadth of Vedic knowledge. I compared it to like mathematics. After you study arithmetic and math for a while, and then you go take an advanced course in mathematics, it's not a matter of faith, that you think the college professor knows what he's talking about. It's really an understanding of mathematics and how it works, Same thing. Still remodeling the kitchen. That's going to be a process, but we'll get it done, and it'll be beautiful when it's all done. It's step by step, slowly unfolding. And this other thing I put here, Gyan is the foundation of success. Knowledge. Gyan is like the knowledge of the structure within the absolute itself. And that's where real knowledge exists. And that's what really births the whole relative existence, the whole universe. And it's physics. Again, it's not just some hocus pocus fantasy thing. And the more you get into it, the more you start to realize that, hey, this is the real thing, So we'll talk about that in a little more depth today. And those of you who've listened to my previous several podcasts, I talked about Brahma Chaitanya, Brahman consciousness. And hopefully most of you have heard that. If not, you can still listen to this. It'll make it, it'll be good. But the more you have an understanding of Brahma Chaitanya and of the different things we talked about, the structure of within the absolute of fully open throat, to Ka, the self-interacting dynamic within consciousness, which is the vowel sounds within the Sanskrit alphabet. And you see there's an unmanifest component to that. And that all interacts with itself and it creates a structure. And out of that structure, in the past podcast, I explained how you can pull Samaveda out of that, Rig Veda out of that, Yajurveda, Tharvaveda, they all come out of that and what they mean and how what they're about, better than what they mean, what they're about, so beautifully corresponds to an understanding of that self-interacting dynamic. All makes sense, and it's profoundly beautiful. By the way, that with that eclipse yesterday, I got off the subject there because also there's a conjunction between Mars and Ketu, which is not good, and it's war, and which is what's going on in the world today, with Hamas and Israel and all that. So good time to lay low and try to avoid getting into any fights or conflicts, So I spoke about Brahma Chaitanya, Brahman consciousness. And I use the example, whatever object is right in front of you, you can just use that. I use the pillow because it's right in front of me. I'm looking at a pillow. And anything, or a room, the entire room, or, anything, when you look at it, you see it for what it is on the surface, but you also see what it is in its depth, which is what? The totality. And you see that full spectrum, and it's just not conceptually, but just experientially what it is. And so when you first have that experience, if you don't have a knowledge, you might even think you're going crazy. I am that pillow. What's going on? Or I am this room. Anything you put your attention on, however big, however small, however vast, you're that, And again, it's not a matter of mood. It's not a matter of philosophy. It's not a matter of attitude. It's a state of physiology of consciousness. And you might say, that's the all, isn't it? Stage of evolution. You see everything on all the different levels, even the finest celestial level, the full spectrum of all of it. What more could there be? And that's really the subject of the title here, how to attain immortality. Now, what do we mean by immortality? Why are people born and then they die and they incarnate back and they're born and they die? What's going on there? Why does that happen? It happens because it's a function really of mind. The mind is an incredible thing. We have the transcendent, self-interacting dynamic of oneness, and then we have the structure that creates, and that structure, as it emerges, we call it Buddhi, intellect. There's an intelligence to that structure, you see, and then as we get more superficial, we get into the mind, the nature of our minds. And the mind, when it's functioning in perfect harmony with its own true nature, when you become more and more fully in tune with yourself, the Atma, the totality, that which dwells at the depth of all relativity, then the mind functions in harmony with the totality, in harmony with the natural law. But that's a rare state, and it's a state that even exists beyond Brahman consciousness, Brahmi Chaitanya, that state I was describing. Because you see, even after Brahman consciousness, which is very profound, and it happens very much on a deep level of your being, there's still the more superficial level of the being with which most of us associate as ourself, but it's really superficial. It's called the mind. And so there are different things that determine the nature of our thoughts, the nature of our mind. They're you don't have to remember this, but the Sanskrit term is vritti. There are 5 different vrittis, 5 different influences, you can say, on the mind that determine the nature of our thoughts. And really only one of them is really pure, really good, comes right out of the absolute. So our thoughts, our behavior, our emotions, everything are perfectly in harmony with nature, our own true nature, which is divine. which is that self-interacting dynamic of oneness. And again, in previous podcasts, we talked about that in more detail, the adhika and all that. But isn't it interesting that you can be in Brahman consciousness and there's still a long way to go? You know, like it's been said, an avatar, you know, an avatar is difference. What's the difference between a person in Brahman consciousness and an avatar? A person in Brahman consciousness is still living in a mud house. In other words, there's still refinement to the awareness, which correlates to the nervous system. When we talk about nervous system, we're talking about the subtle nervous system. And there's still refinement that can take place there. And as that refines, the physiology refines. And so a person less and less is living in a mud house and more moving in the direction of a more crystalline type of a structure to the house that they're occupying. Okay. And it's the nature of that mind that has qualities that even after you drop the physical body, those qualities persist. And so if the vritti has conditioned the mind to think a certain way that's not in harmony with nature, then you reincarnate back, you know. But there is a level of awareness, a refinement, even beyond Brahma Chaitanya, which where the mind is profoundly pure, you know, functioning in harmony with nature. So there's the only vritti that's there is the one that's pure and in harmony with nature. And so then when you drop the physical body, you don't go into different astral levels. And I think I've talked about that in previous podcasts. You know, a lot of different things can happen after you drop the physical body. But when all the imbalance is purified out of that, then you go on. Now you can say, well, don't you go on anyway? Yeah, but you don't remember. You don't, you get lost, if you will, in the permutations and the tumblings of the conditionings of the mind. And so isn't it remarkable that you can live in a very exalted level of consciousness, Brahma Chaitanya, but still the mind can go through greater degrees of purification. And that's hugely challenging because it's how our minds work. I've talked in the past about the chit, the storehouse of impressions on the mind, and you can refer to that as the subconscious. And a lot of times we think we're deciding things with our conscious mind, whereas largely we tend to be rationalizing those impressions, that subconscious conditioning. We rationalize it with the intellect, superficial intellect now, but it's really more a function of the vritti, of the conditioning, of the programmings, of the chit, of the subconscious. And clearing all of that is a huge thing. And the conditioning of the mind takes place not only through all the incarnations and all that, but also the conditioning of the mind is largely a function of, you know, how we're brought up, how we were raised, how we think. And for that reason, you know, because the idea how to become immortal, how I mean, I'd have to say, don't hold your breath, but nevertheless, we're talking about an understanding of the process here, you know. And so if you're living in a crude environment, and the environment in the world today is unbelievably crude. I mean, watch the news. It's all just bombarding us with unhealthy conditionings, unhealthy programmings. But now there's a balance there because you still need to know what's going on in the world. We live in the world. So burying our head in the sand isn't a solution. But nevertheless, how we function, how we think, how we feel, how we speak, people we associate with, how they speak, all of that imposes impressions upon the mind. And so if the environment is harmonious with nature, hey, great, and then it'll facilitate the evolution, the refinement of the mind. But by and large, there's a lot of crudeness in the world. And so we do well to do our best to protect the mind. Protect the mind, And one big key to that is when you think about it, really, when we look at other people, I mean, yeah, we love people and we have our loved ones and things like that. But at the same time, we are quick to look at the glass not as half full, but as half empty. What's their problem? What's wrong with them? What are they doing wrong? How could they be better? What's not good? And much of how we judge people, it's based on that. And so what does that do to the mind, to your own mind? Particularly because we tend to function that way. That's how we're conditioned to function by our environment from childhood. A gardener, I spoke of this, I think I maybe even spoke of this last podcast, but a gardener, when he looks at a sprout, doesn't, reprimand the sprout and get angry at the sprout if it has any ill health, but it nurtures the sprout. And now there's a realistic arena here, isn't there? Because I'm not talking about love and light and everything is wonderful and you're all so beautiful and everything. There's a pragmatics to it, but at the same time, where are we really coming from? And we tend to come as a culture, really. We tend to be cultured to think in a manner of the glass is half empty and what's wrong with it. And that's how we view the world, and that's how we view other people. And so that very mode of function is not consistent with developing a house of crystal as opposed to a house of mud, huh? Now, I hope is that clear, Scotty?
Yeah.
I think it's clear. So now we have another component. Now we can say this real quickly. I've said it a million times. You can go to YouTube, go to Michael Mama's channel, learn the meditation. What does that meditation do? That meditation is what brings your awareness to the transcendent, Chaitanya, and enlivens your wakefulness to that level of perfection, and then it wells up through the physiology. That's the most powerful tool you have to attain Brahma Chaitanya, and that's also the most powerful tool you have to refine the mind. But at the same time, if you're feeding that and it's all welling up, that sense of divinity and perfection is welling up within you, but you put a cap on it with the way you think, with the way you function, how your mind works, then where you say you're filling up the bathtub, but still have the drain open, that kind of an idea. So there's one other thing, another major component, and that is our speech. A very significant percentage of your evolution comes from your speech. Now, speech in and of itself is a very interesting thing. I've talked in the past about Shruti. Shruti is sound. And you have this self-interacting dynamic within the absolutes, unmanifest. unmanifest, pure in the field of no thingness. There are no things, it just isness, okay? Consciousness before it precipitates out as anything material. And so within the structure of that self-interacting dynamic are all those swaras, the things that correlate to vowels in Sanskrit, that are the underlying basis of the mechanics of that self-interacting dynamic within the absolute. And as that bubbles up, as it shifts into relativity, it's really interesting. It shifts as shruti, sound. And what are those sounds? Those sounds are the Sanskrit alphabet. If the Sanskrit alphabet is not those sounds, then that's not Sanskrit. The Sanskrit alphabet, by definition, is the fundamental constituents, you can say, the alphabet, of the sounds that percolate out of the absolute. And each of those sounds, though they become concrete in a way, because you can hear them now, they're sounds, and that's manifest, but they have their roots in the unmanifest, so they're infinitely and inherently in infinite harmony with the totality. And so there we've got what's called the Sanskrit alphabet. And now we're off and running. The Sanskrit alphabet, I mean, it's really amazing to study it, because I talked about how the physiology, and in particular, all the physiology, but in particular now we're talking about the physiology of the mouth and the throat and everything that's involved in making speech. It all maps so perfectly onto the Sanskrit alphabet. And to the Western ear, we're just so not used to a lot of those sounds. I mean, I don't even want to try, but there's ta, and ta. And there's there's the guttural sounds like ga, like ka and ga, and then cha from the palate, cha, and then da from the palate, da, and then da, and all those are different sounds, and that's all critical stuff. And if it's aspirated, da, 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 or if it's just da, da, so it's not no like breath behind it. It's almost like you build up a pressure. Ta versus ta, ta versus ta, ta. I'm trying to emphasize. But the point is that if you really get into the Sanskrit alphabet, those subtle nuances are huge. And if you speak to somebody who's, brought up in that culture, they hear a huge difference in those things, whereas we don't even notice in the West, But the point being that then studying Sanskrit and working with Sanskrit, what it starts to do then is what? It's culturing your ability to function in harmony with the laws of nature. It's a tool. It doesn't mean that you have to do that to attain Brahma Chaitanya or immortality or anything like that. But it is a tool. And it's a powerful tool if it's something you choose to pursue. But even if you don't pursue that, just your speech in general, how do you speak? Does your speech tend to be harsh? Does it tend to be judgmental? Is it an expression of your view? It is an expression of your viewpoint of the world. Your speech defines who you are. It's an expression of who you are. And so even if you're just speaking your native tongue, which is just great, what you say, how you say it, it's a critical factor. It's an important component to your evolution. Meditation and your speech, this might be the two most important things. There are immortals on the earth, not a bunch of them, and I'd say predominantly they're living in caves in the Himalayas, I guess. Well, very few. But they do exist. And the Saptarishis, which map onto the stars in the North Big Dipper, they're all immortals. What else, Scotty? Is this all making sense?
Yeah, it does.
There's just so much that I want to say, but it needs to be gauged, and it also has to do with the listener so much. I mean, how much can they hear, or how do they compartmentalize it? What do they do with it? Do they take it and put it in a package and say, "Oh, okay, well, I get that now"? There's a expression that I came across, and it was just like a wham for me when I heard it. Consciousness is Brahman. You see, what is Brahman? Brahman it's not a thing. It's not even a like the transcendent is beyond thingness, but there's still an actual reality to it, if you will. In that sense, Brahman is different. Brahman is a state of consciousness where where an individual awareness can go to the pillow as a thing, to the pillow as God, to the pillow as the source of totality of all existence, like it says in the Brahma Sutras, it goes both ways. The totality, the pillow is part of the totality, or the pillow birthed the totality. I mean, it's just unbelievable, but that's how it works. That's how the universe is structured. Movement is called. You can move back and forth between those different levels of reality, if you will. But in that context, consciousness is Brahman. Your consciousness is Brahman. Consciousness is Brahman. The question is the experience of it foggy? Is it clouded? Is it shrouded by the different vrittis, by the different influences on the mind, by the chit, the storehouse of impressions, the subconscious, and how it colors the awareness, the consciousness. And so our experience of our consciousness isn't as profound as Brahman because the windows of perception just aren't clear, So when you even hear something like consciousness is Brahman, that's a Mahavakya, that when you're in the right space and you hear that, it can be like the light bulb, the Maha light bulb going off, Whoa, that's it. Because when you first enter Brahman consciousness and you first see that everything's lightly etched on the face of the totality, and that totality, you struggle to find a name for it. It's like he who has no name might be how you try to give voice to it. I hope I'm making sense, Scotty.
Yeah, you are.
It's making sense. Consciousness is Brahman. And when you first open the He Who Has No Name, for example, it's so overwhelming that so in that context, consciousness is Brahman. Your consciousness is Brahman. That whole thing, what you're experiencing through that, is your own consciousness. Consciousness is Brahman. Your consciousness is Brahman. You know, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, I am the totality. But to say it in different ways, you know, I know when I've taught through the years, I'll be teaching something, trying to get a concept across. I'll say it one way, I'll say it another way. Then I'll find another way of saying it. And then somebody hears it and say, oh, well, if you just, okay, boom, a little mini Mahavakya, you know, the light goes on. Now they get what I'm trying to say. And I've heard it many times. It's like, well, if you just said it that way in the beginning, I would have understood it right away. Well, maybe so, maybe not. But nevertheless, in that moment, it was like a mini Mahavakya. And the Mahavakyas are like that, you know. Consciousness is Brahman. Wow. Well, I hope this was helpful. I hope this was good. I hope you're following me. You know, it just feels like enlightenment, awakening to Brahman consciousness. It's just almost like just snap out of it. Just stop it. But that's so not the way it works, because the mind is identified with itself as the self. It doesn't see the self as the self. It sees the mind as the self. The mind, including the emotions, all those experiences, and it's like how they're processed. I've compared it to kind of like trying to punch your way out of a Teflon bag, you know. There's no punching your way out of it. It's more of a gradual transformation. Your most powerful tool is proper meditation, watching your speech, watching your behavior as best you can. I've met people, I wanted to bring this up, very few, I can think of one really in particular, but there were others who, by virtue of their upbringing, and I'm thinking of people, particular person I'm thinking of now is brought up in I think a small village in South India. And they cultured their behavior just spontaneously from childhood. Your behavior gets cultured one way or another. And this particular individual is so clear that their consciousness, their behavior, I mean, how they thought, how their mind worked, was so cultured based on their upbringing in a manner that was so close to natural law. And see, so that could happen on the surface of life, whereas, you know, Brahman consciousness hasn't even been developed yet. For that person, when Brahman consciousness awakens, their evolution to further and deeper degrees of Brahman consciousness, leading to immortality, you know, wouldn't be as big a challenge. It's such a humbling. I was humbled when I spoke with that person. It was unbelievable, you know. And so that's, you know, I'm an American. I was brought Americans. I mean, not to, that sounds too judgmental, but we don't have the refinement level, certainly that person had, generally speaking. But that's certainly my focus for my personal life right now is to work with the refinement of my mind, of my speech. And I've been studying Sanskrit quite a bit. I mean, you can study any of these fields for a lifetime, you know, but I find it so fascinating. You see, there's the subjective and there's the objective. I talked about that before. The subjective feeling level, the depth, the no thingness, no concrete edges, and then the objective. And I know in math, I found the beauty, the music. I found the subjective exquisiteness, the music within mathematics, even though mathematics, strictly speaking, we could say is quite an objective approach. Within the absolute, it's all about the subject. It's all subjective. And when those two things come together and unify, that's a huge level of enlightenment, really. Knowledge and experience. But I'm realizing for myself, you know, I just have to be really careful what I associate with, who I associate with, and how I view things. It needs to be cultured in a manner that's not really consistent with the typical upbringing, certainly in Western civilization. And not just the West, I mean, pretty much everywhere, but there are little pockets, that little South Indian town, wherever that was. But anyway, that's what I'm working on. And I got a ways to go, I'll tell you. All right, I guess that's about it. Scotty, anything else?
No, I think that was a lot.
Okay, thank you everybody for listening, and we will talk to you next week.